Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Brain Camaraderie podcast. I'm Yatika Savani-Muthukrishnan, the CEO and founder of the Brain Camaraderie, a youth-led nonprofit supporting patients impacted by rare neurological diseases.
And I'm Nanika Mundler, and I'll be your co-host today. And we are deeply honored to welcome a pioneering advocate today, Andy Stevenson. Andy is the co-founder and head of fundraising at Reverse Rett, a UK-based charity focused on accelerating treatments for Rett syndrome. Andy's journey begins with his daughters, Beth and Amber, who were diagnosed. He made the profound life shift from being a PGA golf professional at 23 years to becoming a full-time rare disease advocate in 2012 and working with disorders like Rett syndrome, a devastating neurodevelopmental disorder. His work confronts the systematic gaps in the UK's rare disease landscape, where essential research infrastructure heavily depends on community-driven fundraising to influence scientific progress and policy change.
Thank you, Nanika. Andy, thank you so much for being with us today. Your work is truly inspirational. And to start us off, could you tell us a little about Rett syndrome and maybe introduce yourself in your own words?
Okay, I'm Andy Stevenson, and I co-founded Reverse Rett in 2010. My daughter Beth was diagnosed with Rett syndrome in 2002. Rett syndrome is a rare neurodevelopmental condition caused by a mutation on the ECP2 gene. It usually affects girls and appears after an apparently normal early infancy. There's a major loss of communication and motor skills, seizures, breathing irregularities, and complex health needs. There's over 50 symptoms, but not everybody has every one of them. So it is a very complex condition.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. What was the pivotal personal moment or realization that drove you to leave a stable career to dedicate yourself fully to the long-term fight against Rett syndrome?
When Beth was diagnosed, I basically lost enthusiasm for life. Things that were important to me became irrelevant, like supporting sports teams and things like that. And looking back at how I was at that time, it was clear I'd developed depression, but I just didn't know it. I had already done some fundraising challenges after my nephew James died of cot death, so training and taking on challenges became some kind of coping strategy for me. And then on Beth's 5th birthday, so that was 2005, I made a promise to do everything I could to give her a brighter future. A lyric from a song by Idlewild that came out around her birthday resonated with me, so I'd rather have hope than sadness tattooed on my arm. That promise grew into a life change, moving from a stable career into full-time charity work and fundraising so we could plug gaps in research, push clinical trials in the UK and support families directly. 20 plus years on, both Beth and Amber, who's my stepdaughter, continue to motivate every decision. Leaving being a golf pro wasn't as big a decision as people thought at the time. And it was a scary to change career after 23 years. But by then I was fully invested in doing what I could to help the cause. And I've never regretted, the decision.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that insightful story. And I know from a parent to caregiver's perspective, living through those early developmental losses and then facing the continuous decline, must change you deeply, as you just said. Do you have any moments or memories that shaped your understanding of Rett syndrome that you would like to share?
It's very difficult when you get a diagnosis like this. It's kind of a grief, but it's layered. The loss of the expected developmental path, the daily management of complex needs, the oscillation between hope and exhaustion. There's relentless practical pressure, endless appointments, unpredictable health crises, and an emotional undercurrent of wanting your child to be known and understood. Many of our families that have told us that the community and shared purpose, fundraising, campaigning are what keep them going. It definitely kept me going. There's a constant realigning of your hopes and dreams. With Beth, she was my first child, and I didn't really know much about children at that point in my life. I'd not really been around newborn children. So I didn't know probably till much later that there was something wrong. And afterwards people told me, oh, we could tell there was something wrong with Beth. She wasn't doing this, she wasn't doing that. All I could think was, why didn't you tell me at the time? Because I had no real idea. And you go through all the usual things in your mind, worrying about, milestones in a person's life, worrying about the first boyfriend. That used to worry me a lot. A wedding day, a first job, all those sort of things. But Rett put an end to all that, and you have to sort of realign your expectations.
Thank you. In 2007, Rett syndrome was actually reversed at the University of Edinburgh. Edinburgh. Were you aware of that breakthrough at that time? And if so, how did it reshape your mission at Reverse Rett's direction moving forward?
Well, at that time, Reverse Rett hadn't started. I'd been looking for somewhere to fundraise for Rett research, and there wasn't anywhere. There wasn't anywhere in the world that I could go, right, I'm going to fundraise for this particular non-profit or charity. And then that happened in Edinburgh, and it was a big deal, but it was before social media and things like that. I wasn't on social media anyway, so I wasn't aware of a lot other than this had happened, but I didn't really know what it meant. And I've always had quite a blinkered mindset where I sort of focus on what I'm doing with my fundraising and just let everything else happen around that. I didn't sort of look too far ahead because there's not really any point in that. It didn't help me. So finding out that by restoring the protein in a sick adult mouse could reverse the symptoms of Rett syndrome, it did change everything. But I think those of us who were around at the time, and I can only speak for myself because, as I said, I didn't know anybody else, any other families at this point. I didn't know any other children. I hadn't met any. Well, for me, I just kept thinking, why is it taking so long? What's going on? Why is no one, making a big deal of this? And why aren't we hearing more about it? And I realized that there was no they. Scientists need funding. They can't work in isolation. They're not going to. They're going to work on other things. So we realized that, or eventually I realized that there was only us. We had to do it. So what happened after that, after a couple of years, I found a charity in the States, RSRT, Rett Syndrome Research Trust, and I started fundraising for them. And I did okay. I sent probably £8,000 or £9,000 over to RSRT, but it's hard to fundraise for a charity that's in a different country. People always think, well, if it's going over there, it's only helping Americans. It wasn't. This was a global effort. It just so happened that the charity that was getting these research projects together was based in the States. So I always thought, it was going to make a difference for us here as much as anywhere else. And then after a few fundraisers for RSRT, I was contacted by their founder, Monica Coonrads, and she introduced me to 3 other parents with the aim of starting a similar charity in the UK. And that's pretty much how Reverse Rett started. The 4 of us sort of got it going. For the first probably year, 3 of us did nothing. And one person, Rachel Bloom, she set the charity up. She built the website. She actually, she'd probably hate me for saying this, but she took out a personal loan and paid for a lot of the things that were needed. There was a lot of red tape involved. So she was the driving force behind setting the charity up. At this point, I was just carrying on with my fundraising, putting the money to one side, waiting for the charity to officially launch so that I could, give the money into the charity. And she was doing all this in the background. So it was pretty amazing when she said, right, I spoke to her for the first time in October 2009, and then we launched in end of June 2010. So she'd been working away all that time on her own, getting the whole thing set up, and then we launched.
Thank you for sharing your journey. And yeah, I understand the financial burdens just to, start the change. We'll come back to Reverse Rett in a moment. But now let's talk about what you said in the media. So you've talked openly about the way that some doctors communicate with newly diagnosed patients and families, especially the overly grim and outdated advice that they give. What do you think is the most damaging consequence of this medical culture that withholds current research progress from parents?
I think when clinicians give predominantly pessimistic messaging and fail to share active research, families can be robbed of agency and hope at a critical time. They may disengage from research options, miss trial windows, or spend energy only on short-term care rather than advocacy. And the worst consequence for families is that they may feel abandoned or misled, and the community loses potential trial participants, fundraisers, and informed voices that drive change. Um, Speaking for myself, when I got the news that Beth had Rett syndrome, um, quite quickly my mind was turning to research. And as I said earlier, there wasn't anything happening then, because this was 2002 and we were a long way from anything exciting taking place. But that's not the case now. And I think clinicians who don't do a little bit of research about where we are in Rett syndrome and don't tell the families that they are giving the worst news that you could ever give somebody, I think they're doing them a disservice when they don't give them the right information. There's no consistency. For example, I've had parents tell me that doctors have told them not to Google Rett as though the information is depressing. Others have even been told um, to make your child comfortable and prepare for the worst, which is obviously horrifying and not actually factually correct. But on the other hand, there have been instances when a doctor has said, if you had to get a diagnosis for a neurological disorder, then Rett is a good one to get, as the research is really promising and moving quickly. And people who have been told advice like that have become massive fundraisers for Reverse Rett and really hold the same hope that the rest of us do, that there's going to be meaningful change. But that first conversation that you have with a doctor when you get the diagnosis is going to be burnt into every parent's memory. So getting some positive information at that point is crucial. We had a fundraiser last year, Catherine, who has an 11-year-old daughter. She wrote a messed that one up, didn't I? A blog post about how she had so many years of feeling desperate. And I'm just going to give you a quote that she shared with us when she wrote her blog post. She said, "At the time, I was in a very dark place, facing a bleak future, which I dare not even imagine. Denial had got me through the early years, and I'd kind of coasted along until it was becoming clear that my little girl was turning into a young woman. The feeling of grief and helplessness, which I've been suppressing for years, were finally taking their toll. So when I say meeting Andy and the Reverse Rett team that day in Dorset changed my life, it is no exaggeration. I began learning about the extraordinary work Reverse Rett do and the unbelievable prospect of gene therapy. Now, it was funny with Catherine. I was doing a 100K walk with a team for Reverse Rett. We had our T-shirts on, and she was doing the same walk with one of her friends or two of her friends, and she saw the T-shirts and she came over and we had quite a long chat. And since then, she's done 3 or 4 more fundraisers and team fundraisers with quite a lot of us, and I've done a few with her. And you know, she says it's changed her life having that, to steal your title, camaraderie, um, because she had had such a difficult time, and she had had only negative advice for so long. So, you know, being active and choosing hope over despair is really powerful, and can it can really help people, help families, you know, cope with what is something that no one should have to cope with.
Yeah, thank you. And it's amazing how you're doing the work that, the doctors should really be doing, like supporting the parents. And that's like amazing to see. I do have a question about fundraising, as you did mention that. Could you tell us more about the activities that you do in your fundraising, Reverse Rett? Because I know you guys do like runs to get, funds. And I think that's like really cool. And I think we should definitely mention that.
Yeah, well, most of our income, about 80% of our income, comes from a small group of families, their friends, connections, and local communities. Sometimes when you're a parent, and having a child with Rett syndrome, it takes over your life and it's overwhelming to deal with. Um, so throwing fundraising into the equation isn't possible for a lot of families. They can't do it. They don't have the time, they don't have the energy, and they have other children. There's a million reasons. So when that's the case, what a lot of families do is they reach out to people that they know, other family members, friends, connections, and try to get them to carry some of the burden. And we've had some amazing fundraising over the years, um, where people have gone, the extra mile just for one particular child. And I would say we can trace almost every donation back to a particular child from the 15 years that we've been going, which I think is quite remarkable. We're in the Reverse Rett bubble, so I don't know if that's normal for a rare disease, but we know the children, and it's about 120 of them, that have carried this for so long, which is a really small number. If you think that there's probably, if we go by the statistics, there's probably 2,500 people with Rett syndrome in the UK. So having 120 children carry £13 million worth of fundraising for 15 years is exceptional. And it's not easy to raise money. I often say that raising money is often harder than the actual challenge. And the more challenges you do, the harder it gets. People have seen it all before. So it's not easy to do. And I've done a minimum of three challenges a year since 2002 when Beth was diagnosed. It's humbling to get the support that I get. I don't raise this probably the same as what I did in the early days, because I have been bugging people and annoying people for a long, long time now. But there are people from those early days that still support me. And what I tell families is, and I believe this, and I see it again on social media, I see comments all the time and posts all the time about how parents, how inspirational they are to their friends and family by what they cope with and how they do it. And they want to help them. And there's not really much practical help you can give when you've got a child with Rett syndrome. Most people run a mile, you know, um, especially when they get a little bit older and the medical problems become more complex. People aren't comfortable, helping out and giving you a break and all the rest of it. So the one thing that they can do is either take on their own challenge to support, or make a donation. And it doesn't matter, it hasn't mattered to me how many times I've asked, people have still given, and I've probably averaged about £2,000 every time I've done a fundraiser, which over the years has added up to a lot of money. Um, so that's why I think you've got to be hard-faced is probably the wrong thing to say, but you've got to be quite confident in yourself to keep asking. People do keep giving. I'm proof of that. And if I have no problem doing it personally. I know a lot of people who do a challenge and then they say, "Oh, I'm not doing another one for 3 years because I've asked everyone." That's not me. I just look at Beth and Amber and think, what else? What else can I do? This is their life. They're the one living with Rett syndrome. I'm living it, obviously, as a parent, but it's not inside me. I'm not in discomfort physically every day. I'm not trapped in a body that doesn't work. They are. So it's the least I can do is go out and ask people to support me, you know. And at the end of the day, people support people. It doesn't matter whether you're doing a 10K or a marathon. It doesn't make really that much difference. They support a person who's going to do something to help their own child and other children, moving forward.
You talked about the human generosity, and you said that before that 80% of your income comes from the community fundraising. What is the deepest truth that you learned about human generosity and the motivation when you're relying on the public rather than the government systems to fund rare disease research toward those that want to reverse it over the years?
Um, in reality, at the end of the day, there's so many rare diseases, as you know. It would be impossible for governments to fund them all. It's just not. It's not reality. A major gap is that the UK policy has historically under-resourced coordinated infrastructure and translational pipelines for rare diseases. That means that charities like ours must fund clinical centres, registries, trial coordination, so that research can happen here. Resources that ideally belong to a national research and NHS-connected strategy. The result is duplication, wasted time, and delayed patient access to trials. So I'd just say that charities shouldn't be substituting for national infrastructure. We can and should partner, but the baseline investment needs to be public and strategic. And we've been funding a specialist centre in London, King's College Hospital, since 2019. It was supposed to be for 3 years. It turned out to be 5. And that was a huge amount of our income. And we couldn't sustain that. And it has to be picked up because it's helping people live. That centre is helping people survive that otherwise wouldn't. They have an intimate knowledge of the condition, and they are really good at talking to other doctors who might have a child in hospital with something Rett related that they can't really deal with because they don't understand it properly. So that centre has made a massive, massive difference, but we couldn't carry on fundraising for it forever. We couldn't. It's just, our income has remained static for a long time. It's been around between 800 and 850,000 for about the last 14 years. And this centre was costing us around 400,000. So that's half our income gone right there. And there's lots and lots of other things that we need to do. So it would be great to partner more with government related bodies, but at the moment it's not happening.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Now, could you talk about any strategies you have or any way that you think you can mitigate this problem and how you can translate physical, visible efforts of community action you've been involved in to influence any UK policies themselves to kind of fix this problem that's happening?
I'm not sure we can on our own. We've signed petitions alongside other rare disease charities over time and sent letters to different departments. I don't know. I haven't got a lot of faith in politicians, wherever they may be. And I'm not sure what we could do to really push that forward, because we are such a small voice. You know, if you're a cancer charity or you've got something really high profile, I'll give you an example here. We've got a rugby player who died. He had MND, and he was promised by the last government that they were going to fund some kind of centre. They were going to give £1 million. I think it was £1 million. I might be wrong on the amount, but they were going to give £1 million. And I know they're still fighting for that money. The government promised it, but it doesn't mean you're going to get it. So it's a very difficult situation. And I honestly don't know what the answer is.
Beyond the logistics and the policy battles, there's obviously the emotional work. Could you talk about like any hidden emotional pressure of leading a charity in a space where families are like waiting, hoping, and depending on progress?
Um, well, I spend most of my time at work talking to families, and often newly diagnosed ones. And every time that I do, uh, it takes me back to the day that Beth was diagnosed and the meetings we had with clinicians around that time. And I've had to come to terms with that. And I think I have over the years. I think I've got to the point now where I can talk to families, come off the phone or come off Zoom, and not sort of sink into some kind of, malaise or get upset. I still get upset. I still get emotional, especially when I see some of these children that are 2 and 3 years old, because it's the same thing. I remember Beth being that age, and I know what's ahead. And the one thing that keeps me going and keeps me motivated is that I don't think that these children that are that young now are going to have our experience of Rett syndrome. So that is the thing that, really drives me and keeps me going and moving forward. Um, I'm probably the person in the charity mainly. Not you know, there are other people who talk to families as well, but it's a main part of my job, a big part of my job. I'm the person that families will look to for answers and for momentum, and that's a huge responsibility. Um, Behind the public optimism, there are sleepless nights and fundraising stress and the moral weight of spending donors' money wisely. There's also tension between being a parent and a public figure, protecting your family while being visible in the fight. Um, and there's a difficulty with life-work balance. I should probably say at this point that Rachel, when we started the charity, lived in Oxfordshire, had 3 children. She was a single mum, and things worked out that she's now my wife and my boss. So things changed quite a lot. So if you imagine we're both here in one house, we're both working for the same charity, we both have the same goals, we both have the same drive, it's going to cause a few, explosions and eruptions within the household from time to time. It's only normal. So work-life balance is a constant battle. I've tried all kinds of different things. I've tried having a different phone and turning my work phone off at 5 p.m., things like that. It made me more stressed. You know, people sometimes want to talk to you after work and late in the day, messaging, whatever. So not having my work phone on didn't really help me. It actually made me worse. Um, So to sum it up, you're carrying other people's hopes in your pocket every day, and that's a privilege, but it is also a pressure. Uh, yeah, but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. I understand it's incredibly hard to, keep your professional, like, emotional tolls that you get professionally and also, like, separating that from your private life, but at the same time, it's connected, so that's, like, incredibly hard. So thank you for sharing that. And
I
yeah.
just want to say the one thing that I really, really struggle with is when a child starts to have seizures and the hospital isn't really helping and they're not getting the meds right and they feel or it could be breathing problems, whatever it might be with these young children. Sometimes there's no answer. No one can answer because there's so much of Rett syndrome that's unknown um, still. And I hate that. I hate when that happens because I feel like I'm letting down that family massively by not giving them an answer to something. And to say to them, well, that's just part of Rett syndrome, it always feels totally inadequate. Yeah, it is a fact, unfortunately. There isn't an answer for every little problem that a person has with this condition.
Yeah, having that balance is incredibly hard. Thank you for sharing. And now that Rett syndrome is, described on being on track to be the first neurological disease to be cured, what do you think makes Rett syndrome suitable for this breakthrough? And why are scientists so optimistic that it could set a precedent for reversing other neurological disorders?
Great advantage we have with Rett syndrome is we know that it's caused by a single gene. So that makes it a lot easier to potentially cure than a lot of other diseases where they don't really know what causes it and why and how to act against it. So it's a very, very simple that sounds ridiculous. It's a neurological disease, so it can't be simple, but it's relatively simple from a scientist point of view. You've got this gene, you know what the gene is, you know that it's a lack of protein, and basically the problem is getting the right amount of protein back into that gene, and that's potentially the answer. If you put too much protein in, you get a different condition. So it isn't simple, obviously, but we have these targeted strategies, and then there are other things coming along in the background. We're at a point where there's clinical trials using gene therapy. They've had they've had a setback in that trial where a patient sadly passed away. Due to a reaction to the vector that they used to get the new gene into the body, which is I believe the statistics are 1 in 100,000, which is just awful for that family. Um, you know, you've already won the wrong lottery by getting Rett syndrome in the first place, which is around 1 in 10,000. So to hit it again with something like that is just so tragic. But so far, these trials are showing real huge improvements, and it's still very, very early days, and we can't get carried away. But there are children doing things that they haven't been able to do for 20 years. These are adult people with Rett syndrome who have been able to sit up unaided, are using the hands again purposefully. I think that's right. So the improvements, there's improvements in mobility, there's improvements in speech, and this is quite a surprise because at first the first part of a trial is to try and keep it as safe as possible and prove that the drug isn't toxic. So to have these results in the first few patients is really promising. So I think that is why everybody in the science world is really excited about Rett syndrome and the potential for a cure. But I would say a cure is a strange word. I think a cure, it can mean different things for different people. I mean, Amber is 30 and Beth's 25. They've suffered for so many years. They've had multiple operations. They're on all kinds of meds, to keep them alive. Would a cure be the same for them as for a 3-year-old? Definitely not. But at this stage in their lives, it's a relief that they're still with us and we feel blessed for that. When so many other people have died with Rett syndrome. And we would literally take any improvement. It doesn't have to be a full cure. We don't expect them to suddenly start talking after all this time and walking around and living a normal life. That's not really realistic. But any kind of improvement would be, pretty amazing. And so if we can do this for Rett, it will light the path for many other genetic brain disorders in the future, which is also exciting.
Yeah, truly hopeful for the future. And I think we will definitely get at that point very quick, especially with all the technology and everything. So yeah, that's great. And Reverse Rett has been, built on ideas of driving treatment. So what do you think is a singular achievement, whether it's the widespread availability of gene therapies, any major policy change, or any shift in medical communication, etc., that you think is a definite sign that everything is finally nearing the end and that, you've reached the goal?
I think we've come so far in a relatively short space of time. It's hard to put into words because, as I said earlier, it's been like this has happened, that's a good thing, and straight away the next day almost we're thinking about the next thing. So we don't really stop and sort of sit back and think, oh wow, this has happened and this has happened. But I think as far as UK patients are concerned, well, I would start by saying that we sent over 7 million to um, the labs working on this gene therapy, and other ways to cure Rett syndrome. And most of that money was sent to the University of Edinburgh. There's 2 labs there working on Rett syndrome. So we had quite a big impact that way financially. And then we've had the other things. I think getting the clinicians together was a huge moment so that there are people around the UK who know about Rett syndrome now. So I think we are getting closer, and I think that one day will come where there is a treatment that makes a significant impact for everybody living with Rett syndrome, and that's the point where we can start to think, well, maybe our job is done, and we can be made redundant, which was always our goal from day one. The sooner we were made redundant, the better, because it would mean that life was better for people with Rett syndrome. We obviously aren't there yet, and putting a time frame on it is impossible. No one can really say. But with the exciting data coming from the gene therapy trials, I think our next big battle is going to be to get this treatment funded, because the UK has a very different way of funding medicine than they do in the States, because it's funded by the National Health Service. So you have to go through a process to show that the financial benefits of people having this treatment. It's not just a case of, well, there's this treatment and it makes life a little bit better, so we better give it to people. It doesn't work like that. You've got to show the cost of the condition, which is something that we've been working on in the last couple of years with a company called Costello Medical, who gave us a grant to try and find the true cost of Rett syndrome, which has been a massive piece of work. There are so many costs. We've sent out a lot of different surveys to families and had a great response to try and find the true cost, and that will arm us when we go into battle to get these treatments approved. So I think that's our next big fight, our next big job, as well as everything else, because there are still things in the background, the next generation of gene therapy and other RNA editing and things like that are going to make a big difference to the condition. Just with gene therapy, there's talk of, instead of the gene being either in the spine or put into the brain direct at the back of the skull, which is how they're doing it on the Neurogene trial. They're looking at ways to put it in through intravenously through, straight into the bloodstream, which is a massive thing because there's a lot of children with serious breathing issues who can't have a general anesthetic. So at the moment, and Amber's one of them, at the moment they couldn't have gene therapy. So if things keep moving forward and it can go into the vein, it will make a huge difference. I think I might have just waffled on a little bit there, but hopefully you've got the gist of what I was trying to say. I think you'll need to do some editing on that bit.
No, I'm glad you're going into depth with these questions. We're learning a lot for this and talking about your funding for the Reverse Rett and raising awareness is obviously a big part of that funding. For students who are listening and who want to do more than just raise awareness, what is one highly impactful concrete action they can take today to like accelerate their research or break down systematic barriers in the community surrounding them?
I would say there are probably 3 things they could do. Volunteer to help with data entry and registry projects or trial logistics. Organised fundraising challenges that fund targeted, research grants and things like that. And use research engineering skills to help develop low-cost assistive tech prototypes or data visualization tools for registries. Being proactive on social media or interactions with with your local media is also really, really beneficial in getting the word out there about whatever disease it is that you're supporting or fundraising for. Because we still get, after all these years, we will go to an appointment with a neurologist with Amber and we will have a doctor say, I don't really know anything about Rett syndrome. I've never had a patient before. And they'll have Googled it before we've gone in, which it seems insane to me because I've got 2 children with it and I'm involved with so many different families who have children with it. I don't know how anyone doesn't know what it is now, but it's still amazing how many people have never ever heard of it and have no idea about it. So you can't really underestimate how much awareness matters. And also awareness, not just of what Rett syndrome is, but also how close it is to being cured. Because everybody likes a feel-good story at the end of the day. And if you've got something positive to come out of something so horrible, why wouldn't you want to be part of it?
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And it's quite fascinating and scary to see like doctors who actually don't know about these syndrome. Yeah, that's kind of really surprising. I really hope we don't really run into that too much. But yeah, I do understand awareness is the biggest that we have to do. And finally, let's talk about more on the patient or the parent side. If you could speak directly to a parent who received a Rett syndrome diagnosis for their child this morning, for example, knowing everything that you know about the decades-long journey of research since 2002, what is the most important message of perseverance and hope that you could offer them?
Um, well, when Beth was diagnosed, I was alone. I'd separated from a mum before we got the diagnosis. And as I said before, when I looked for a way to help fund research, there weren't any. Now, today, the world is a very different place and parents are not alone. Science has made progress, as we've talked about. There are people and organizations fighting for treatments right now. So I would just say, hold on to hope, connect with your local, with the Rett community, because it's a small community and everybody helps each other. Get yourself registered on the patient registry, because that's how you're going to find out about research and trials. And if you find it helps you, because I'm not going to sit here and say to somebody who's going through this hell that they should be doing something like fundraising or anything like that. I know after all these years that not everyone can do that. But if you can channel your energy into one small action, it will grow into something that helps more than just your family. You will feel empowered by joining the fight when it feels like there's nothing that you can do. And there's so many examples of that. Catherine, who I mentioned earlier, is one of those. So the challenges that we do, and the team challenges especially, are so they're so much fun. You know, I know that sounds strange when you walk in 100K without any break, and you're walking through the night, and it sometimes takes up to 36 hours. They are fun. You're all there with a purpose, and you come away from those weekends where you've done that and just feel invigorated and motivated, and mentally you feel like you're in a much better space. So if you can do things like that, it's worked for me. It's helped keep me relatively sane.
Andy, thank you so much for sharing your insight on that and your strength and everything you've learned through this journey. I understand that how hard it was to even like start up this organization and continue it through all these years. And this has been such a meaningful conversation. Me and Yatika have like, genuinely enjoyed like your full insight. So don't worry about you ever talking too much. We genuinely enjoyed your like deep responses to our questions. It helps us learn more about how we should focus on how to build our organization, because our organization is to advocate for like brain diseases. And for our audience, this interview will be available on Spotify soon, YouTube and Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and also our nonprofit's website. If you're listening and felt impacted by this conversation, please consider this episode with a friend or on social media.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and all the other platforms to stay updated with the brain camaraderie and our work. Thank you.
Bye.